right there. Oh well, too late. Anyways, let's yeah, so something I've been wanting to react to for the last week now, because I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan. And this sounds really interesting to me, so turn this up.
Over 20 years ago, Final Fantasy X was released on the PlayStation 2. It has since gone on to become one of the most iconic and recognisable games in the franchise, even spawning the first direct sequel due to how much it not only resonated with fans, but
So to give you never mind.
also the developers themselves. Part of this was due to how well its numerous innovations gelled with elements that were inherited from previous installments. But what has often resonated the most with people was how well crafted the world and its characters. Her main hope was that Seymour could come to be accepted by the people of Spira, but when the exile from Guardo Salon was enacted, she was suffering from a critical illness and was unsure how much time she had left to help this become a reality. It left her with two choices: die in Barge Temple and leave Seymour to fend for himself, or train Seymour, serve as his guardian on his pilgrimage, and then offer herself up as a faith in preparation for the final summoning. If Seymour was then able to defeat Sin, she felt
Yeah, so I remember like there was a what was it, playground rumor when I was growing up that Animus is like modeled after her or his. I probably mispronounced that. His summon, Seymour's summon, it was modeled after her. I don't think that's true. I'm pretty sure that's not true. This might tell us, but yeah, she sacrificed herself to become, or so that Seymour could use, that summon.
that he would become a hero to the people. The plan almost worked, but Seymour did not have the maturity to understand the sacrifice his mother had made, and left Zanarkand instead of using the final Aeon to defeat Sin. It wouldn't be until 15 years later
See,
that
they
Seymour
look
would
nothing
return to
alike.
Zanarkand to recover his mother's faith and gain the power of Anima. He then moved the faith to Barge Temple, placing a seal over it so that nobody else might gain access to its incredible power. Perhaps due to the sadness that surrounded Seymour and his mother, Anima became a faith associated with the darkness element. This
Anima,
element
that's
would
what
not be
it is.
accessible to the player, as darkness would instead be a status effect. The darkness element, though, would be denoted within the Chamber of the Faith, as the Yevon symbol for darkness was displayed on the wall, but it would also appear within the middle of the summoning glyph. Alongside darkness, Final Fantasy X would feature 7 other elements. 5 of these would be common: fire, thunder, ice, water, and light. But 2 other elements would also exist. The first of these would be mu in Japanese, meaning nothing, which could then be taken to mean
Yeah, so I had no idea what those symbols meant. Never had a clue. Played through it so many times. I honestly figured it was just made up for the game, and it was just one of those things like if you own the strategy guide, or if you were, a developer or an artist on the game, then you were one of the people that knew. But apparently they have actual. That's cool. They have actual meaning. So there's something I didn't know.
non-elemental. This would be associated with both Valfor and Bahamut. The second element, denoted by this symbol, would be associated with Yojimbo, but there was no context provided within the
It's a
game
dope symbol.
to explain what this element was meant to be. Even though that may be the case, Yevon script can be used to provide some backstory around Yojimbo. After venturing deep inside the Cavern of the Stolen Faith, players would find the Yojimbo Faith statue placed within a shallow hole in the floor. Atop would be pieces of tape that featured writing in Yevon script that said "Seal." The Faith statue itself would depict a warrior, and on its back would be a circular shape featuring what at first glance would be an ornate pattern, but upon closer inspection it would be Yevon script, with the translation being mea culpa, the Latin phrase for my fault or my mistake. When attempting to acquire Yojimbo, Yuna will be posed with a question: what do you want of me? The answer given would not only serve as the first stage of the bartering process that determined how much Yuna would need to pay for Yojimbo's services, but when called forth later, it would also affect the motivation for Yojimbo to perform Zanmato against different types of enemies. The raw power offered by Yojimbo often made its acquisition quite appealing to summoners, one of whom was Lady Ginham. Ginham was supported on her pilgrimage by Lulu, who at the time was only 20 years old. But despite making it to the steps of Mount Gagazet, the duo were unprepared for the dangers found within the Cavern of the Stolen Faith. Lulu would manage to escape with her life, but Ginham would unfortunately perish, remaining unsent and losing all semblance of humanity. This failure would eat away at Lulu. Part of this guilt stemmed from the knowledge that Lulu had only become Lady Ginham's guardian as a way of preparing herself for the future. For years, she had attempted to dissuade Yuna from following in her father's footsteps, but after her efforts failed, Lulu determined that the only way she could keep Yuna safe would be to assist her on her pilgrimage. Lady Ginham offered her the chance of gaining some first-hand experience. It's unclear whether Lulu would have faced a stigma, having survived while her summoner did not, but 18 months after returning to Besaid, she embarked on a second pilgrimage. This time Lulu supported Father Zook, but she was not alone, as Wakka would join the pilgrimage as a second guardian, but he also had an ulterior motive. Whereas Lulu had chosen the path as a way of preparing to protect Yuna, Wakka was fueled by revenge. He wanted to become a guardian as it would give him the highest probability of defeating Sin, according to the teachings of Yevon. Wakka would seek that revenge following the death of his brother, Chapu, at the hands of Sin. But like many other people in Spira, this would not be the first loss suffered by Wakka at the hands of Sin. When Wakka was only a few years old,
Yeah, it's been a while since I thought about it. This is what made this game so good, was there's so many moving parts in your party involving all your party members that all like connected with each other and connected with the story as a whole by the end. Like everyone had their motivations, everyone had a reasoning, everyone felt like they were legitimately justified in why they wanted to join Yuna and take up this quest. So yeah, even though it was the last one, God, I really wish I was better with names, but never mind, I'll just cut that out. But anyways, it was just so good, so good.
Sin launched a deadly assault on his village. Many perished, including Wakka's parents, and as the dust cleared, he was left holding his baby brother. Wakka was taken in by the people of Besaid, and although they would act as surrogate parents, Wakka assumed the role of father figure for Chapu as opposed to that of an elder brother. As they grew up, Chapu would become frustrated by Wakka's attempts at parenting. He wanted a brother as opposed to a father. This led to a rift forming between the pair, and instead of staying devout to the teachings of Yevon, Chapu chose to join the Crusaders. Ahead of a big Crusader operation, Wakka gifted Chapu the Brotherhood as a peace offering. It was meant to signify the bond they shared, but Chapu chose to leave the sword behind and instead put his faith in forbidden Machina technology that was supplied by the Al Bhed. Chapu would then die at the hands of Sin, and Wakka would hold numerous people responsible, including Luzu, but the Al Bhed would become one of the biggest sources of his ire. Having been around for almost a millennia, the Al Bhed had become accustomed to this kind of discrimination. 1,000 years prior to the main events of Final Fantasy X, two distinct groups of people existed, those who could use magic and those who could not. To bridge the gap, a group of workers called the Badol created Machina. This enabled non-magic wielders to perform incredible feats, but instead of quashing this, the mages chose to take advantage of the Badol, enslaving them and threatening execution should they fail to complete their tasks. In the end, the leader of the Badol, called Alb, chose to fight back. What followed became known as the Machina War, and it would forever change Spira. Badols who survived were dubbed the Al Bhed, an amalgamation of the group and its leader. They congregated on Bikanel Island, but were forced to abandon the island after Sin attacked and destroyed their community. Due to their limited resources and general disgust amongst the rest of the Spiran population who had become indoctrinated as to the ways of Yevon, the Al Bhed struggled for support and became a nomadic group of people. Despite how much the Al Bhed were ostracized though, some were still able to integrate into society by towing the line. Rin, for example, was still able to establish a chain of travel agencies throughout Spira. Al Bhed were also permitted to take part in the annual Blitzball tournament as a show of good faith. Each year, they will be represented by the Albert Sykes.
Blitzball, though.
They will be joined by teams from Besaid, Luca.
If you have ever gotten Wakka's ultimate weapon and sigil, you understand my hatred and my pain of Blitzball. I had to play so much fucking Blitzball. So much Blitzball. It's like, that's really, even to this day, that's all I can say. It's like PTSD. Just so much Blitzball. Too much Blitzball.
And Kilika, with the Ronso and Guado also represented. According to the Ultimania though, two previous teams also existed, the Bevelle Bells and the Yokan Nomads. It's unclear why these teams were no longer competing, but the logo of the Bevelle Bells could still be found on the wall of the Besaid Oryx's locker room.
Okay, never noticed that.
The locker room would also contain logos for some ancient teams, the Zanarkand Abes and the Zanarkand Duggles. These two teams would feature during the game's opening sequence. It's unknown how many other
Zanarkand Abes were Titus's team at the start of the game.
The teams play Blitzball in Dream Zanarkand, but the Zanarkand Duggles were said to hail from Zanarkand's C South district, whereas the Abes hailed from the A East district. Even though the two teams existed in Dream Zanarkand, they were also very real. When Dream Zanarkand was created, it was designed to be an accurate representation of the real Zanarkand, and to ensure it continued to grow and did not become stagnant, it was made possible for its inhabitants to live normal lives. This meant there would be highs and lows, with citizens able to have relationships, children, and even die. Over time, this meant the population of Dream Zanarkand would become quite unique, and due to them being physical beings, albeit summoned, upon death, their souls would even find their way to the far plane. To ensure Dream Zanarkand continued to exist, the hundreds of faith that were summoning this huge physical...
So, Zanarkand never really existed is what he's telling me? God damn, really? See, this is why I love this channel. I think I know so much about Final Fantasy, and then I watch some of this dude's videos, I'm just like, well, fuck me, I guess I don't know shit. But wow, so, yeah, I didn't know that. I thought Zanarkand was a real place. It just got destroyed, and... You know, Titus, spoiler alert, Titus was selected since Jecht was Sin, and, you know, he knew his son and Auron could defeat him by teaming up with Yuna, who was Jecht's, God, what was it, Summoner, Jecht's Summoner, because Jecht was a guardian for Yuna, his father, who was a Summoner. You see, it's a huge, long, complex story, but I thought, long story short, I thought Zanarkand was a real place. And apparently it's not. Apparently it is just a dream place that is used for to keep stopping sin, I guess, to summon warriors to keep stopping sin. Wow. I mean, I get it. It's hard to explain. I get it, but it's just I did not know that till now. Actually, there's been a lot of stuff I didn't want to stop at every other 2 or 3 to be like, huh, I didn't know that. So, but yeah, that's a big one. That is a big one that shifts a lot about my perception of Final Fantasy X. God damn, this game was so fucking good. Leave a comment or like down below if you want me to play it on Twitch.
Were protected atop Mount Gagazet. Sin, amongst other things, would serve as their guardian. It was designed to ensure that the faith remained undisturbed and that the remaining citizens of Spira did not discover the physical location of Dream Zanarkand, which was not too far from Barge Island. As such, Sin would seek out civilizations that grew too fast or began to use and create machina that could be deemed threatening. Within Yevon's script, Sin would be represented by the same symbol as the letter Z. This could be seen numerous times throughout Spira, and it would sometimes be paired with the letter A, which would also be used to represent Yevon or Yu Yevon. This was a purposeful act, with Yu Yevon representing the beginning and Sin representing the end. Players would see firsthand the destructive power of Sin during its assault on Kilika. Many lives were ended on that day, but perhaps the most devastating incident would be Operation Mi'ihen. This would be a joint operation between the Crusaders, a group of volunteer mercenaries, and...
Yeah, see, that was a big thing too. They had no problem showing you how powerful and badass Sin was. Like, pretty much a few, well, no, it's a little bit more than a few hours into the game, but yeah, they show that scene of that village being destroyed, and it's just like, oh, fuck, and then he just calmly just goes through it like it's no big deal. And then this is later on during a bigger battle where he just, you know, as you saw, vaporizes people, and it's just like, oh shit, how are we supposed to stop or even come close to stopping this fucking kaiju type thing?
The Al Bhed. There were many throughout Yevon that were against the operation as it defied the teachings of Yevon, but it ended up being given the green light due to strong support from Maester Wen Keenock and Maester Seymour Guado. Keenock cared little for the outcome of Operation Mi'ihen, or the heresy involved. He only supported the plan because it would provide suitable cover for something else that would see him branded as a heretic if people found out what he was doing. Keen to gain power and strengthen his position, Keenock wanted to investigate the Den of Woe. This was a hidden cave near Mushroom Rock, and there had been reports of a very powerful machina being held within. Seymour also wanted to gain power and strengthen his position. Together with Keenock, he had managed to ease the concerns around Operation Mi'ihen by convincing the high ranks of Yevon that it was a win-win scenario. If they did manage to defeat Sin, then that would of course be a wonderful occurrence. But it was far more likely that they would fail, and if that scenario played out, it would mean the Crusaders and the Al Bhed would suffer considerable losses, weakening the strength of each group. Yevon would then be well positioned to capitalize, but Seymour did not share his true plan. This would only be realized in the aftermath of Operation Mi'ihen, as although Yevon would assert themselves in the power vacuum that was created, so too would the Guado. The reality of this shift could be seen in-game. Ahead of Operation Mi'ihen, cities like Luca would be bustling with activity and the Crusaders would be plentiful. After Operation Mi'ihen, when venturing back, cities like Luca would feel quite different. Conversations would talk of loss, and the Guado would be much more prevalent. That such a move had happened would have been unfathomable such a short time before, but it would not have been possible without an act of kindness from Grand Maester Yoimica. For centuries upon centuries, even though Spira had become home to many different races and cultures, Yevon, the preeminent faction, had been dominated by humans. Yoimica decided to change this through his sub-race appeasement policy. It would see Jyscal Guado and Kelk Ronso conscripted to spread the word of Yevon to as much of Spira as possible, and for their services they would end up being made maesters. Due to how new they were to the fold, both Jyscal and Kelk had an altruistic view of Yevon. They were made aware of some of Yevon's darker secrets, such as the truth behind the final summoning, but were kept in the dark over many other aspects. Part of this was because they had strict moral codes and were not used to being more pragmatic about what needed to be done for the greater good. This would be, for example, why Jyscal chose to exile his family, as it was a sign of repentance in accordance with Guado values. It's believed this is why Micah and Keenock ended up being supportive of Seymour's decision to murder his father, as they believed Jyscal was starting to become a problem and that Seymour would be more aligned to their way of thinking. Kelk would end up leaving Yevon of his own accord after.
Yeah, if you haven't caught on by now, there's a lot of politicking in this game. There's a lot of, power struggle and, what is it, like religious views to some extent. This is kind of a very religious heavy game. I've always taken it as they took a lot of inspiration from world religions. You have Sin, Yevon, all that stuff. Anyways, so yeah, that was also something that you kind of need to play through more than once to fully understand, everything that's going on here. Again, it's not just the characters and all their arcs. It's also all the side characters and their beliefs and their motivations. Like every little person has a reason for why they're here and why they're doing what they're doing, or why they did what they did to end up where they are by the time of this game's events.
To the support of Micah and Keenock was revealed, with Seymour even chastising his ignorance over what had happened to Jyscal. Considering Kelk was assigned as the Minister of Civil Affairs within Yevon, this would have been understandable, as alongside overseeing the Treasury and General Civil Administration, he was also the individual in charge of Yevon's judiciary system. Yevon, in general, would profit from ignorance. They used only 3 key points to keep the denizens of Spirit in line: that sin was a symbol of mankind's sins, that the people must atone for their sins to keep sin at bay, and that the use of Machina was prohibited. Those who attempted to introduce more specific philosophies that went beyond this were often branded as heretics. And even though the official policy was that heretics should not be harmed, behind the scenes, the reality faced by those who questioned Yevon would often be quite grim. When such situations arose, Yevon would often defer to the warrior monks. In the official sense, the warrior monks, who were overseen by Keenock, were established to defend the temple in Bevelle and to serve as bodyguards, protecting high-ranking priests and the maesters themselves. But Keenock would often choose to deploy the warrior monks when individuals or factions arose that they felt could become a problem. Anyone who served amongst the warrior monks and served well would be held in high regard amongst the high-standing members of Yevon. But that would be the key: doing what was expected without question when asked to do so. Those who let personal convictions supersede their duty to Yevon would often find themselves ostracized, and Oren would find this out the hard way. Once a rising star within the warrior monks, it was assumed that Oren would amount to great things. But after he refused to take part in an arranged marriage, a lucrative promotion was withdrawn and his star fell. This decision would allow the rise of Wen Keenock, as he received the promotion instead. These events left Oren dejected and without purpose. Those feelings would prompt Oren to leave the warrior monks, and it wouldn't be until Braska approached him to ask for aid on his upcoming pilgrimage that Oren's feelings of duty and honor would be reignited. Unlike many of the other warrior monks encountered throughout Spira, Oren would always carry with him a jug that contained a specific beverage, Nog. It's unclear what the context of this was in relation to Spira, but Oren was inspired by wandering, masterless samurai, and the jug was meant to highlight his divorce from the warrior monks. He would drink from the jug during 2 specific overdrives, Banishing Blade and Tornado. In the case of the former, Oren would take a drink and then spit on his sword as a way of purifying his blade. Tidus would have 4 separate overdrives, and
yeah, I did not know that about his jug. I always wondered if there was a bigger meaning to his jug or not. But in order to get all that stuff, all this lore, first of all, he probably had to buy a bunch of books that Squaresoft puts out about the game. But you have to pretty much 100% it, because you have to find all the what were they like? They were like recorded spheres that would show you Oren and Jet and Yuna's father on their adventures, which were really cool, but a bitch to find. Some of them were a real pain in the ass to find. But yeah, another cool thing I didn't know.
New ones could be learnt through continuous use. His final overdrive, Blitz Ace, would see a barrage of strikes landed before one final show-stopping move finishing off the combo. It would see Tidus jump off the hilt of his sword before kicking a blitzball at the target with extreme force. This blitzball would be thrown by one of Tidus' allies, but who performed the throw will be determined by a hidden affection meter. Outside of affecting who threw Tidus the Blitzball, the affection meter would also have an impact on the narrative. Throughout Final Fantasy X, there were numerous instances where players could see different cutscenes from one another, with perhaps the most notable being the Machina sled ride to Macalania Temple. Another would be aboard the Fahrenheit after the party had defeated Sin's Fins. But perhaps the most interesting aspect would be the default priority ordering should there be a tie in affection. For example, Lulu would be prioritized during the sled ride, with Kimahri placed last in the pecking order. However, for the scene on the Fahrenheit, Yuna would take priority, followed by Auron and Kimahri, with Lulu and Riku placing last. Riku would join the party after a boss encounter at the Moonflow. She would have many quirks, but perhaps the most pronounced, her deathly fear of thunder, would come to the fore when crossing the Thunder
back
Plains.
in the day.
You're giving me the creeps.
This would be deep-rooted, and Brother would be the individual responsible for Riku's astrophobia. The story goes that when they were younger, Riku was attacked by a fiend. Brother stepped in, attempting to use thunder magic against the foe. However, instead of landing a direct hit on the fiend, Brother scored a direct hit on Riku. Outside of highlighting Riku's fear, the Thunder Plains would also have an intriguing lore detail relating to a previous High Summoner, and that's because its historical name was the Gandalf Thunder Plains. The name was bestowed to honour Gandalf's conquest of the Cactuars. They had plagued the Jose continent, but Gandalf managed to lure them to the Thunder Plains where he sealed them in stone. Gandalf would also be responsible for the naming of another landmark in Spira dubbed the Scar. Found within the Calmlands, the Scar was a huge gorge that served as a very large and literal reminder of the battle that was waged between Gandalf and Sin. This fateful encounter between Gandalf and Sin would happen 400 years prior to the main events of Final Fantasy X and 600 years after the first appearance of Sin. It would see Gandalf be the first summoner to defeat Sin since Yunalesca, and it helped to quash the numerous dissenters who had started to rise up in protest of Yevon. As nobody had defeated Sin for such a long time, Spira was unsure what to expect when Gandalf called forth the final summon.
Yeah, I love this area because there's subtle, like, right over here, I'm assuming this is when a Sin's attack that is permanently indented into the fucking mountain. It just seems like there's little subtle, what is it, like ways of telling the story through the environmental storytelling. That's the word I'm looking for. In this little area, again, it looks like, you know, you can kind of see what looks like the land has been pushed in, probably by Sin in the fight and the battle, and Sin's just raw powers. Whoops, my bad. But yeah.
The Scar would serve as a devastating example of the raw power that summoners could possess, and it ended up impacting the lives of many Spirans who lived and worked in the area. One such example came from the ostracizing of Remium Temple. This was once a frequent spot for summoners on their pilgrimages. However, the Scar would create a chasm so large that the only way to access Remium Temple would be through the use of a chocobo.
So let me know if I'm wrong, but I think was Remium Temple only in the Japanese versions of the game, not the American versions of the game, original PlayStation 2 versions? Because I remember the chocobo race. I cannot remember for the life of me if this was in the original game, because you get the what's it called, the Magnus Sisters? Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong on what they are, but you get a summon out of here, and I'm pretty sure it was not in the initial release in the American versions.
Due to how inaccessible Remium Temple became, it would remain dormant for centuries. That was until a failed summoner called Belgemine made it her home. It's unclear when Belgemine decided to occupy Remium, but after dying during her pilgrimage and remaining unsent, she decided to serve as a mentor for summoners who would pass by. Her role would be twofold: to ensure that they were battle ready for the heightened challenges that lay in wait, but also to remind summoners that they were not tools of Yevon. They were their own people, and she would teach them to channel their efforts on why they wanted to defeat Sin. Despite this role, Belgemine also had a pessimistic view of the future. She believed that summoners were essential for defeating Sin and bringing about the calm, but with Sin also coming back, she was convinced that it would, at some point, end up eradicating all life on Spira. To try and prevent this from happening, Belgemine built a ship in secret that would contain numerous creatures from all across Spira. This would then sail out beyond Sin's reach so that life on Spira would be able to live on in spite of Sin. Those who perished at the hands of Sin and were lucky enough to be sent could be encountered at the Far Plane. During the first visit to the Far Plane, focus will be placed around the playable cast, but upon returning to the Far Plane later in the game, it will be possible to see NPCs there interacting with their lost loved ones. In one such scene, the player could,
especially at the time, this was one of the craziest areas in video games when it released, just because it really looked like a never-ending expanse of flowers and fields, and there was this massive waterfall you see in the cutscene when you first enter there. And then every time, like you said, every time you come back here after a certain point in the game, one of your characters or one of the side characters will be in here, and you can see their
could see
loved
once
ones that
the brother
died.
of Awaka the 23rd talking to his sister. It would later be revealed that the sister of Awaka and Once was a summoner. She had left on a pilgrimage to try and defeat Sin, but had died along the way. As both brothers were not strong enough to serve as guardians to their sister, they would end up feeling terrible guilt over what happened, and this would serve as their main motivation to support Yuna with her pilgrimage, no matter the cost to their own personal lives. That selfless role to support the summoner, irrespective of how it manifested, would first be shouldered by Zion. He, along with Yunalesca, took the noble decision to sacrifice their lives so as to try and quell the madness that Yunalesca's father, Yevon, had created. This set in motion the birth of the second sin, but what they didn't know was that Zion would be stuck in purgatory for hundreds upon hundreds of years.
They knew
It would
who
only
was
be
mainly
upon the
buying these
success of
games.
Gandalf
They knew
that
what they
Zion
wanted
would be
to see.
freed. But by that point, his
Titties.
soul was so corrupted that instead of going to the Far Plane, it ended up in Via Infinito. Even though it was almost
That's like
600
stew.
years until Gandalf's success, it would take much less time for Sin to be defeated again. This time, a former Blitzball player turned summoner called Holland would be the victor. Prior to undergoing his pilgrimage, Holland would leave his prized Blitzball with relatives, and in the modern day, one of the ancestors of Holland would end up serving as a
There it
bartender in Luca. The next defeat of Sin would take even less time, with only 130 years separating Holland's victory and the victory of Jokun. To ensure she was strong enough to complete her pilgrimage and defeat Sin, Jokun often trained outside the Cavern of the Stolen Faith, and her triumph would end up being
I missed that story as well, I think. I remember talking to him. I don't think I got the full
very
Jokun
notable
story.
due to her being a prominent member of the Crusaders prior to undertaking her pilgrimage. The Crusaders themselves were a very old organisation that was established by an individual named Mihen. Their original name was the Crimson Blades, but after they became recognised by Yevon, they were renamed as the Crusaders. In the current timeline, Keenock chose to pay homage to that original name by creating the Crimson Squad, a group he hoped would surpass the Crusaders and make them obsolete. The role of Mihen would end up being celebrated through the honorific naming of a road. This started just outside Luca, and it pointed towards Bavel. The reason for its naming was twofold. Yevon felt threatened by Mihen and the Crimson Blades, but instead of playing into their fear, Mihen walked the road to Bavel to answer their concerns face to face. Because of this, the road was named the Mihen High Road, partially because the road was on high ground, but also because by answering the call of Yevon, Mihen took the moral high road. This road would become a prominent route of passage out of Luca, but it would end up being destroyed by Sin. To ensure the legacy of Lord Mihen was not tarnished, the creation of a second high road was commissioned. The original high road was then renamed to the Old Road. And with that interesting nugget of lore, we are at the conclusion of this specific video.
Oh no, it can be all of them.
We'd love to know in the comments how you felt about this
Nice.
concept and whether you'd like to see us take it even further in the future.
Definitely.
And if you did enjoy it, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as there's no better time to get notified about videos than right now, especially with Final Fantasy 16 on the horizon.
If
Alright
you own a
everyone, with
PlayStation,
that, this is Daryl signing out.
fuck my
As
life.
always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube member supporters, especially Benjamin Snow,
very
the
good.
Livestream, Elsa Claire Farron, Galcian D. Kajata, Gregory, Justin Dent, and
Okay.
Zuko.
Sorry, man. Your Patreons, not mine. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, good video. Good video. A lot of stuff I did not know in there. A few things I'm surprised he didn't put. Now I could be wrong about this. Wait, is this? Is a secret? Let me see. Yeah, we'll do that in just a second. Probably won't cut that out. Anyways, I'm pretty sure, let me know in the comments if I'm right or wrong about this, that Final Fantasy 7 and 10 take place in on the same map in the same world, which is kind of a bigger deal than, I think it's a bigger deal because not a lot of them do that. None of them do that really, where they take place in the same world outside of, the follow-ups after 10, like 10-2 and whatnot. But yeah, real good video. A lot of stuff I did not know. A lot of good stuff in there. Again, that is a very deep game with a lot of stuff going on, a lot of character motivations, everything's connected in some way or another. All the lore is. Let me see if this confirms it or not.
The worlds of Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy X have more than a few things connecting them. While 10-2 contained numerous references to past entries, the game it referenced most frequently was Final Fantasy VII. Featuring a character named Shinra, this allusion to the infamous Electric Power Company was more than just a passing reference. According to the game's scenario writer Kazushige Nojima, after the events of Final Fantasy X-2, Shinra quit the Gullwings and, with Rin's help, developed a way of extracting energy from the far plane, a theory supported by in-game dialogue from Shinra himself. Square even featured an Easter egg in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, but the connections didn't stop there.
I was
right. A key shot of
cool.
Bavel's underground was made to mimic the iconic shot of Cloud looking out at Midgar, along with the boss monster of the Mi'ihen High Road, Fiend Colony, being named after Barrett's favorite insult for President Shinra, King Vermin. The world.
I was right. Yep. Love that fact. I mean, with Final Fantasy VII being my favorite Final Fantasy. But anyways, let's go back and move.